Hi friends, welcome to Raising Lifelong Learners. I'm your host, Colleen Kessler, and this is the podcast where I encourage you to trust yourself and your differently wired kiddos as you help cultivate their curiosity, encourage them to discover the world around them, embrace who they are wired to be, all while helping them discover their passions, interests, and raise them to become the amazing adults they're meant to be. Hey, welcome back. This is episode 224, and this was a fun one to record because it's one I've been talking about recording with my guest for a really long time, and I finally snagged her on, and we got to sit down and talk. Ginny Yurich, the founder of 1,000 Hours Outside, is a friend. We met at a couple different conferences over the years, and just have had so much fun. In fact, we talk about some fun that we had in Cincinnati the last time we were together. It's just a blast. She's a great person with so much knowledge. You are going to love this episode. Ginny and I talk all about her new book, When the Streetlights Come On, as well as play-based learning, focusing on kids' strengths, getting outside, and all of the different things related to play-based learning and focusing on our kids' mental health using the outdoors as our best tool. You're going to love this episode. Before we get started, special shout out to CTC Math, our season-long sponsor. We appreciate their support so much, and I have told you before I'm a user. I really hope that you check them out, ctcmath.com. They are our favorite math program and really a great support for the program and for our homeschool. So check them out. And let's get started with this episode. Pop your earbuds in, go for a walk, get some fresh air as you listen to Ginny and I talk about 1,000 Hours Outside. Let's get on with it. I am so excited to have my friend Ginny here with me today because we have been talking about getting on each other's podcasts, I think for like 2 or 3 years, haven't we, Ginny?
It's been a long time, yes.
It has been a really long time. So welcome. Ginny Yurich is the founder of 1,000 Hours Outside, and she is just a dynamo in the world of parenting and homeschooling and has so much to offer. So I'm really excited to get her on here so we can talk about the movement, 1,000 Hours Outside, her books. She's got some fabulous books out there already and one coming up soon. And just all the things that she's got going on. So welcome, Ginny. Do you want to take a minute and tell the audience a little bit about you?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Colleen. Well, first of all, we should tell everyone that one of our biggest things that we've ever done together is an escape room. And that was really fun. Your oldest son was there and he was like riding around one of those. It was like in downtown Cincinnati, maybe?
Yes.
Remember?
Yes.
And he was riding around one of those rental scooter things that you can get, or like they have like those rental bikes and rental scooter things in downtowns. So that was super fun. That was a cool escape room. I loved that.
It was fun. I had 2 of my kids there. Molly was there, my singer, and then Trevor. And Trevor is kind of an independent soul anyway, and he's fascinated by those rental scooters everywhere. And funny little side note, about a year before that, maybe 2 years before that, we were in Cincinnati and he desperately wanted to go on one of those. And so Sarah Mackenzie took him on one because our food was taking forever at a restaurant we were at. So she's like, come on, Trevor, let's go. And she took him and they got lost coming back and ended up in a really not great area of Cincinnati. And so I guess my little chivalrous boy was already kind of like feeling protective towards women. So he put himself between Sarah and like people they were passing as she's trying to put herself between like her friend's child. And they get back and she's like, don't ever tell your mom where I took you. And then, when we were going to the escape,
here goes out on
right here. Now everybody knows, don't let Sarah Mackenzie take your kids anywhere. And then when we were walking to that escape room, he thought he was so cool because he had his own debit card. So he kept hopping on and off the thing himself.
Yeah, so that was fun. Adelaide, who does Talkbox Mom, she set that up, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really cool because I think so often when you're at a conference, like if people are listening, they come to a conference, the speakers are just, you're kind of totally inundated from start to finish. They're pretty exhausting. So I thought it was neat that she scheduled that. It was like one of those things that you like don't really want to do because you're exhausted, but then you're glad you did it because it's something fun that goes along. Not that they're not fun, but they're just kind of grueling. So it was a fun thing to have at the end of it. And And that one was a really cool escape room for people that do escape rooms. It had like several rooms, and one of them we had to go down a slide. So it was a lot of fun. I got a
Yeah.
cool picture from it too. So we live in Michigan. We have 5 kids, and they are within 8 years. So our oldest is 15 and our youngest is 7. Ours go boy, girl, girl. We tipped girl at the end. So we have 3 girls and 2 boys, and we love homeschooling. There we go. It's like one of the best decisions that we've ever made. I think even yesterday I was feeling like I'm not doing very good at it, like on the verge of tears. I mean, that's really how most days are, but also I love it. I mean, our kids they thrive. They thrive at home and they have all these great relationships with each other and great relationships with other families. And by being homeschooled, there's just a lot more time. I really can't even imagine, Colleen, like if we were giving up 7 to 8 hours of time every single day for the last 10 years. Because even now, I feel like we don't have quite enough time. I wish we had a little bit more. So, my journey to homeschooling and also to 1,000 hours outside involved a lot of the same things. When my kids were little, I really struggled. Like even when they were babies, like right off the bat, I mean, I struggled like in the hospital and coming home and the whole thing because it was way harder than I was expecting. And I was hoping to put my kids on a schedule because that's what a lot of my friends were doing. I mean, I wasn't hoping, I was just assuming, actually. I'm like, that was my assumption. We're going to come home from the hospital, we're going to go on this schedule, and it's like a 2-hour time blocks, and this is when they nurse. I mean, it was the whole thing. I had the whole thing planned out, and it didn't work. Like from the very first second, I ditched it after a couple weeks because I was like, it was so awful trying to. And I think it works for some kids. It didn't work for mine. So right from the get go, I was struggling with how to fill the days. All of a sudden, I went from working and I was a teacher and then an administrator. I went from working and doing a pretty good job. I felt like, I'm getting nice emails from parents. And all of a sudden, it's like this baby is crying and won't stop and won't sleep. And it's such a long day. So, my early years of motherhood were pretty dark, I would say. We had our oldest, and then 15 months later, we had another one. And then 17 months later, we had another one. And so, we had the 3 under 3. But even when it was just the one, I felt like around the clock I was failing and I couldn't catch my breath and I dreaded it really. And so we just kind of enrolled in different programs. That's what everyone else was doing. The schedule didn't work. So I was trying to fill my day with like we go to the library program and then we go to the swim class and then we go to mommy and me music or all of these different things, and they started to add up financially, but also there was a high cost emotionally because it is so much effort to get your kids to a short program. So I just remember, trying to get 3 kids to the library that are under 3. It's like they're all in different size diapers and they all need extra sets of clothes, and we've got the library bag with the books, and I have the stroller, and I have to have different snacks for these different kids, and you're trying to get them in, and the little one wants to nurse and they're screaming in the car, and then you have to get them through the parking lot, and then you got to get them in, even just getting them into the door without their fingers getting slammed, and then you got to find the room, and then you get to the room and they don't really want to be in the room, or they're running around, or they're fighting with the other kids, or you're trying to nurse and so you can't intervene. I mean, you know, and then it's over and you got to do it all in reverse, and then it will be like 11 a.m. What is this? I haven't even figured out lunch. Everyone's crying. So that's how it was. And I did not enjoy being a mom, Colleen. I mean, that's my honest take, was that I didn't love it. And I love my kids, but I was really struggling with being a mom. And so my life changed in one day. I went from completely drowning to really enjoying life, and it's brought me on this path. It's been 12 years. But back in 2011, I was doing MOPS, and they just recently changed their name, but Mothers of Preschoolers, same thing, another program. And I had a friend at my table who was going to homeschool, and I knew we were going to homeschool. And so we had kind of connected over that. And she had a child that was 1 year older than mine. So she had started to research, and I was like reaping the benefits of that because she was doing it all and she was 1 year ahead. So she came to MOPS one day and she said, "Hey," she said, "there's this woman named Charlotte Mason who says kids should be outside for 4 to 6 hours a day whenever the weather is tolerable." And I'd never heard of Charlotte Mason. So I didn't know she was like from the 1800s. That wasn't part of the conversation topic. I mean, I know some Charlottes. It's like kind of a common name. So I didn't know. I think if she would have had the caveat, I would have been like, yeah, whatever. But she says Charlotte Mason says, and I just remember thinking, Colleen, what an awful idea. That sounds ridiculous. What are kids going to do for 4 hours? I'm like, they can't even sit through the library program. That's 45 minutes. I make them Play-Doh. It lasts for 20 minutes. It's all over the floor. Like nothing lasts for 4 hours. And I think as a parent, that's kind of what you're desperately wanting, right? You're wanting them to have something that grabs their attention for a little bit so that you can catch your breath. And I think that's why TV shows and apps and toys, really the toy market, right? That's what they're selling. They're selling to the parent, a little bit of peace, a little bit of quiet. It doesn't work, so then you buy the next toy. It's a
Mhm.
thing. So she says there's 4 to 6 hours. And I thought, no way, this is a ridiculous idea. This Charlotte has no idea what she's talking about. But then my friend was like, well, we should try it. And I was like, oh, no, we should not. That's what I was thinking. But I did because you like desperately want to have friends when your kids are little too. That's a whole other part. And so we ended up meeting at this local park in Michigan in the fall. So it's beautiful that time of year from 9 in the morning till 1 in the afternoon. And this friend of mine was like, don't bring anything with you. Just bring your lunch and a picnic blanket. And I remember thinking, this is this is not smart. You know, like we should have all sorts of things. We should have our book bag and we should have like a water table and we should have toys. And what are they going to do? And so we met at this park, Colleen, and it was just like a park. When I say park, it wasn't a playground. It was like grass. Oh, there was a little creek that ran through and some ducks. I was like, oh, it's gonna be the worst day ever. But it turned out I say it was the best day of my life because it was the first good day I had as a mom. And I not had a good day. And our oldest was 3, and I would say that I had not had one good day because I just felt like I was a failure all the time. And what happened at the park was that truth be told, I don't even really know. The kids just played with each other. So she had 3 and I had 3. Our youngest were babies, so they sat in our laps and nursed and slept and I don't know, played with the grass and laid on the blanket and rolled around, that kind of thing. And then the older twos, which were like preschool toddler age, there were 4 of them because she had 2 and I had 2. And they just ran around and they came and got food when they were hungry. And I got to catch my breath. And I got to have a conversation and I felt so good. The sun and the fresh air and it's just beautiful out and the shadows and all those types of things. And we left at 1 o'clock, 4 hours, and all the kids fell asleep on the way home, which is, as you know, like a total miracle. Like that had never happened before. And we drove around for a few hours because they were sleeping. Okay, you know, and all of a sudden it was 4 o'clock and I had made it through the day. And so that was a catalyst for complete life change for our family. We immediately dropped a lot of those littler programs and started to schedule in whenever the weather was tolerable on the nicer days, like these 4 to 6 hour chunks of time outside. And we did it for 2 years from 2011 to 2000, a small group of friends, just 3 or 4 families that were willing to do the same thing. And I immediately noticed that our kids were thriving. I was thriving. They're eating better. They're sleeping better. They are happier. They're getting along better. They're playing better inside. It's so many things that I started to notice right off the bat. Also, noticed that we never ran into another kid in those 2 years, not on the trails. We're in Metro Detroit, it's populated, no other kids. And so the last 12 years has been this journey for me of learning, and I didn't know this before, that when we let our kids play outside, and this is self-directed. We don't have to step in. We don't have to run games. Like the pressure is off, parents. The pressure's off. You just go. That it helps our kids in every facet of their development substantially. Like it substantially helps their cognition, their social skills, their emotional health, their physical well-being, and for parents that are interested, there's spiritual lessons out there too. And I know not every parent is interested in that, but some are. So that's out there too. And so I started the movement 1000 hours outside partially based off of those numbers from Charlotte Mason. We were kind of getting outside for about 1,000 hours a year. And I was interested because there's statistics about it. Like
Yeah.
kids play outside for 4 to 7 minutes, but they're on screens for 4 to 7 hours every day. Like that's the statistics. So I was interested in the statistics. And there's a book by Angela Hanscom, who's this occupational therapist for kids. And so she says 3 hours a day is really the ideal for all ages throughout childhood. We're talking newborn through your teenagers, 3 hours a day for their optimal development. So we are aiming to be outside every year for 1,000 hours. Having a year-long goal gives some flexibility for different seasons, both figuratively and literally. And it has really changed our life. I mean, this is the foundation for our homeschool. It has been for the last 12 years. We've been doing the same thing, and we have a very, very full life. It is the answer to a lot of the modern parenting problems, like how to deal with screens, and our kids are thriving. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, but it wasn't really a nutshell because I just talked a whole lot.
Okay, you have heard me talk for the last year and a half about CTC Math. The reason I keep talking about it is that they really are a fabulous choice for homeschool math. We are customers. I have been using CTC Math for several years. I pay for my own subscription and am an incredibly happy customer and consumer of the program. My youngest two use CTC, and it's perfect for both of their very different math experiences. One of my kids is a math go-getter and is a year ahead in math and prides himself on the fact that he can speed through it and do extra lessons to get ahead. We have all of the grade levels from kindergarten all the way to calculus at our fingertips, so he can progress as quickly as he wants to progress, and he loves it. My other one sometimes takes 2 or 3 tries at a lesson because some concepts click pretty quickly and some concepts don't. And she has the flexibility to approach math in any way she needs to. The best part too is the folks at CTC Math are so helpful. They want you to succeed. There was one time where we just could not understand what they were saying and how it was going and how it needed to be explained. And we watched a couple of videos on YouTube, and just as a last-ditch effort, I emailed the support team there and I said, look, I am having so much trouble explaining this to my kiddo. Can you just break it down for me in another way? And they did. They want you to be successful. In fact, CTC Math is so convinced they can help you and your kiddo be successful that they have a lifetime money-back guarantee. Like, what company does that? They want you to be satisfied. They want your kid to learn. That is incredible, and that is a company I want to support. So check them out at ctcmath.com or go over to the show notes for this episode and click on the link. Let them know I sent you. Ask them questions. They are there to support you. ctcmath.com. CTC is the best, filled with the best people. All right, let's get back to today's episode. That's okay. I love it. It was great. It was great stories. And there are a couple of points that I want to draw out in there. The first, I just want to reiterate that idea that there's so many benefits to just being in green spaces that if there's one thing you can do it, or if you're looking for change and you can only do one thing, it's get outside. Even if you're in this season of overwhelm and you don't know how you can get the 3 hours in, get 3 minutes, get 30 minutes the next day, get, 35, and just keep going and going and going because it builds. And just a personal anecdote for that, we've always been, I like to say that we're kind of more outsidey people than outdoorsy people, though I have written a backyard activities book. I've written activities for kids.
I have that one
in the yard, but my kids like to be outside. They don't like to, they've never liked to, there's sensory stuff too, but they've never liked to get dirty and, fall down and just stay outside with the mud. They always want to change and, whatnot, but they still get outside and we still see the difference. So one of my kids in particular is not outdoorsy at all. This would not shock you because you've met her, Molly. She is, entrenched in theater and music and voice and dance and everything else. And so her best day is in a studio where she's working on her art. But when she gets home, and she started doing this again on her own about a year ago when she started having teen challenges, because we all have those challenges. And Ginny and I were talking earlier how stories are our teens when they get into teen years. So, we don't talk a lot about them, but they're there. And when she needed decompression time, or things got, in her words, too people-y, she goes
Mm.
outside on the swing set. We have a swing attached to a ninja line in our backyard, and
Mhm.
she just swings. And if she really wants to
Mm.
decompress and hide from people, she goes in the hammock that we have strung in the backyard and lays in it and kind of pulls it over herself. And she just swings and looks up at the trees. And sometimes she'll be out there for literal hours. And it
Wow.
all goes back to the social and the emotional things, the spiritual things that Ginny was talking about. Our our bodies, our brains are wired to intrinsically know that, intuitively know that that's what we
Mm.
need. And so when we let our kids and push our kids to put down the screens or put down even the books or the toys or whatever and just go, they find ways to connect, and they find that it feeds them, and that follows them
Mhm.
into their teen years when they're making their own choices,
Right.
into their young adulthood. So you can't forget, parents who are listening, that it's not just about exercise, it's not just about fresh air, it's not just
Mm-mm.
about any little one thing. It's so cumulative, and it builds on so many different things.
Mm.
There are books and books and books out there. You could read Richard Louv, you could read Peter Gray. We're going to talk about play in a minute because I wanted to come back to that. And I'm sure, in fact, I'll ask Ginny to give us some other books about just the different benefits of nature, including her
Mm.
own, to put in the show notes for this episode. But that actually was one of the books that transformed my own parenting, was Last Child in the Woods. I read
Mhm.
that when Trevor who's going to be 21 next month,
Yeah.
was itty bitty. And that changed my whole perspective. In fact, Ginny, I've talked about this before. It's kind of like a little funny anecdote. When I first started my site, and you're trying to figure out what you're going to call things and whatever, almost called it Laps Around the Cul-de-sac, because I was constantly
Mm.
shoving Trevor outside to run, walk, or bike around our cul-de-sac,
Yeah.
because he needed the fresh air,
Yeah.
he needed the movement, he needed the sensory input, he needed all of that stuff. And so I would say, okay, you need to go do 5 laps around the cul-de-sac. Okay, go do 10 more. And just that, getting outside is so important for our kids.
And it really does a lot for us too, and I think that is the coolest thing about it. It is this win-win. I don't think there's much else that falls into that category. Like I always say, look, I don't really want to play Candyland, or I don't really want to read these little kids books. You do because you love your kids, but it doesn't really fill you up like how it does for them. But when you go outside, everyone gets the benefit. Even if you go with your grandma and you've got your newborn. So it's always meeting you where you're at, where your needs are, which is, I think, like a total miracle.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And just that whole point of everybody benefits, and
Hmm.
you do too. It's so
Yes.
easy as moms, right? I'm caught in that cycle right now. We've got so many things going on with 2 teens and a tween. Um, Doing the next thing and the next thing and the next
Mm.
thing. There's always
Yeah.
laundry that needs done. There's always dishes that need done. There's always planning that needs taken care
Yeah.
of. And so pulling back when and where you can. But when you can't, and this is a conversation that I was having with another teen mom very recently, when we were both lamenting, for lack of a better term, the advice that we've been getting from other people to just drop a
Hmm.
couple things because we're so busy right now, just to go drop
Oh.
some things. But when you're
Hmm.
parenting teens, you can't always drop things, because some of those things
Right.
aren't yours, as your teens are forming into the people
Mm.
that they're becoming. And
Yeah.
so you have to find other ways to do it. And being outside is something you can fit in the margins and in between. And I can
Yeah.
go for a walk when my daughter's in a lesson. It's just as valuable for me. Or I can throw my 11-year-old in the car with me, and he and I can go for a walk while his sister's in a lesson, and we can get
Yeah.
one-on-one time. So there's lots of ways
It
you can.
looks, yeah, it looks different. And I think it's an important thing to talk about because when your kids are little, like when it was just me that was carrying everybody's stuff and packing up everybody's stuff, that is actually a lot of work and overwhelming. So even if you're going and you know this is a good thing, like you're going to go to the park for 4 hours, there's still a lot of work on the front and back end of that. And so you kind of think, like in the back of my mind, I thought, well, at some point, I kind of like, how parents are. I can't wait till this is easier, until the kids can carry their own backpacks, till they can pack their own snacks. But by the time you get there, you are busy in other ways. And so the point is I think, like what you're saying, you can't wait for a different stage because all of the stages are busy in their own way. And so you have to just do what you can where you're at right now and know that you will be so glad that you did. Even if it was this thing where you're having to pack up everybody and make sure every kid has an extra change of clothes because toddlers don't like to fall in the mud, kind of like you're talking about. Some kids are like, I mean, we would have extra shoes, flip flops, this broke, that thing, someone forgot this, and you have to have a lot and it's a lot of work. It gets easier, but it gets easier physically, but it doesn't necessarily get easier scheduling wise to find time for those things. In fact, in a lot of ways, maybe it gets harder.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I agree. And I think that it needs to be talked about more, actually, that whole transition in those different stages. But that is
Hmm.
not this episode. So we'll have to come back to that one.
Right.
I want to come back to what you talked about in your kind of introduction about play, because
Hmm.
you say, and I have this quote in front of me because you filled out some stuff so we could make sure we touched on some things, that play is the answer to almost any challenge, and so
Hmm.
many different challenges that we face as a family. And I know you've had Peter Gray on your podcast. I've had him on mine. I want to make sure that we link to both of those episodes because I don't think you can hear Peter Gray talk enough. I think that
Hmm.
he has
Absolutely.
so much great insight. His book, again, like Richard Lou's Free to Learn, really was cataclysmic in my transition educationally and
Mm.
pedagogically, like
Yeah.
figuring out the educator I wanted to be when I was actively teaching and then bringing that into my parenting.
Wow.
I just think it's the foundation for who I've become, and I think that
Hmm.
there's so much importance in that. But you talked about when your kids, like back to when they were itty bitty and you did that first 4 hour stint at the park, the idea of
Hmm.
self-directed. Their play was self-directed and they
Yeah.
came to you for food and just to check in here and there. Let's talk a little bit about that. What does that look like? What is play, and how do we even do this throughout those different ages and stages? Because we all think, okay, well, I can get my little kids to play and I can, but my teens don't want to play. My tweens think that they're too cool. I'm an adult, like you said, I don't want to play Candyland. It's not about that. So let's talk a little bit
Hmm.
about play.
Yeah, it's really cool to look at it through the ages and stages. And I think we're in this spot now where we've been living the same way for 12 years. Started with a 3-year-old as the oldest, and now I have a 15-year-old. So it's been interesting to find this one thing that works and it still works. I think a lot of things that you do as a parent, they only last for a short season. You're trying to figure out how to get your kids to potty train. You're trying to figure out how to get them to eat more wholesome foods, all of these different things. And there's an ebb and flow to all of it. But nature works through the entirety of childhood. And then, like my dad is doing 1,000 hours outside. He's got the app, he tracks, he'll send me his things. And so it really is something that you can do throughout your whole life, which is a fun thing because I think it's unique. Nature is unique in that way that it hits all of the ages. So when your kids are growing up and they play, and what Peter Gray says is kids are biologically designed to self educate. They come into the world ready to learn on their own bodies drive them forward. So for neurotypical kids, you've got kids that learn how to roll over, they learn how to crawl, they learn how to pull up on the furniture, they learn how to toddle. Well, no one has set up a course of instruction for them. No one has come in and said, here's the content standards, and tomorrow we're going to work on rolling to your right. And then the next day, right? Like these are babies and they can't even talk. They don't even know what day it is. And yet they know how to learn for mastery. They are mastery learners. And then they go on to something that's harder. This continues throughout life, it continues throughout childhood as long as we give them time and space to self educate. And I think what happens is they are so young, they're 2, they're 3, and we start to enroll them in programs and we forget. We forget that that capacity is there. So when the kids are playing, Peter Gray talks a lot about the social skills, and Kim John Payne, who wrote Simplicity Parenting, says the greatest predictor of success and happiness in life, which is a huge statement. Like, I would never make a statement like this. I would never be so bold as to say the greatest predictor of success and happiness in life, he says, is our ability to get along with others. And so during free play, during self directed play, kids have to learn how to manage themselves. And they have that biological drive Peter Gray talks about. It's their own intrinsic drive that they don't want to stop playing. They love to play. And so that intrinsic motivation helps them to learn how to get along because you don't want to offend the kid. You don't want to you want to be like bold but not too bold. It's that perfect balance where you're learning conversation and you're learning those social skills. So all of those things are happening outside as the kids grow. And I think it's something to say because you said earlier, and it's an interesting point, the little ones know how to play. Some little ones struggle with it.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
and Angela Hanscom, who wrote this book called Balanced and Barefoot, I thought this was such a great thing. She said it can take up to 45 minutes sometimes for kids to develop a play scheme and even longer sometimes if it's something that they're not used to. So 45 minutes is a long time.
Mhm.
That's a long time to sit there while your kids are like, I'm bored. There's nothing to do. And you're like, well, that grates on you. And you're trying to figure it out and you feel kind of uncomfortable. But if you can sit through those feelings for a while, they eventually figure it out. So they're becoming resilient, they're becoming creative. They have grit. All of these things are things that you really can't learn from a workbook and things that you really can't learn at a desk. And when we look at a world that is rapidly changing, and it sure is, also, Kim John Payne says by 2035, 75% of jobs, and I'm not quite sure where he gets this from, but he says 75% of jobs will be for entrepreneurs. And also, he says a lot of people will have their hands in a lot of different pots. And you're already starting to see that, aren't you, Colleen? It's
Yeah.
like, people have two jobs, they've got three jobs, they're doing a couple different things to make ends meet. And so, this resilience piece and this creativity piece and the ability to adapt and shift, that's what we want our kids to have for a rapidly changing future. We used to have jobs that were one skill set for an entire generation and then it would roll over. But things are changing more rapidly than that. And so our kids kind of have to be on their toes. So that's what nature helps them do. That the environment is always changing. It's a little bit of an unknown. You can't control it. And so as our kids have gotten older, it's really just gotten more fun. We get to go do really cool things. Like this was the first year that our youngest was old enough, we did a couple whitewater rafting trips, and the kids can hike further. They can hike higher. They're confident in their bodies because they've had a decade to learn what their bodies can and can't do through small little challenges. Sometimes they'd fall. So our older ones now, when they go outside, a lot of it is sitting at a picnic bench talking with their friends. It looks a lot like that. It also looks like we're hiking to these things called the Black Rocks in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and they're jumping off into Lake Superior. It looks like that. It looks like they are riding their skateboards and they're shooting baskets and they're trying to do trick shots and all of those different things. And even for myself, it looks like I brought along my cross stitch. I brought along a good
Huh?
fiction book to read. It looks different, but it still works and it's still accomplishing the things that we're hoping to accomplish as a family. At the same time, it's binding us together. So in these years where I think it would be easier when they were little to not go outside at all because it was a hefty workload for me, it would be easy right now to not go outside at all because everyone has their activities and their friends that they want to see, and there's other classes they could take online that are within the realm of their interests. And so it would be easy to not have any time for that at all. I could see that once they move out of the house, I could just stay in all the time. There's no reason for me. I don't have to go outside. But this is building in like a safeguard
Mhm.
for a phenomenal life.
Yeah, I love that. My This is a side note. You were talking about the Black Rocks. My daughter had the opportunity to go with a friend. Her family has a cottage up in Michigan by Sleeping Bear Dunes,
Oh,
and
cool.
it's a place I've always wanted to go to. And she spent 5 days there over Labor Day weekend. And she's
Ooh,
like, "Mom, you have got to come back." And this is my kid who does not enjoy being outside, and she
wow.
just loved the challenge of climbing the dunes and the hikes that they went on.
Wow.
And recognized that, okay, this is why hikers wear long pants, because the sand coming across with the wind can hurt. And I found
Mhm.
this rock that looks like Ohio and thought it was funny that I took it out of
Oh,
Michigan, so gave it to dad who's a Buckeye fan. And the connections that you make being outside
right.
are just beautiful and lovely, and the relationships that are drawn from those experiences. And like you said, they
Mhm.
change as they grow, but they're
Right.
so much richer and so exciting to be a part of that evolution. Tell me a little bit
Mhm.
about your book that's coming out. You've got several books and we're going to link to them all, but I want to hear about your new book.
Okay, so this is a book I've wanted to write for a long time, even though I wouldn't consider myself a big writer. So I taught math, and so writing, you tend to be like one or the other. So writing wasn't necessarily my go-to, but I've had this title in my mind for a long time, like 6 or 7 years, and it's finally coming out in mid-November. It's called Until the Streetlights Come On, and it is sort of how a return to yesteryear in some ways is what still gives us a very full today, but also prepares us for tomorrow. So I think there is this misnomer, and this is partially why I think a lot of parents struggle. It's why I struggled, certainly. There is this misnomer that you sort of have to give up today in order to prepare for tomorrow. Like you have to sacrifice it. You have to go to this class and you have to have your kids enrolled and you have to be so busy. And if you don't do this, it's that college prep mindset that starts so young. Truthfully, for some, it's even starting in the womb. I mean, I remember reading articles like you should have headphones and put them on your pregnant belly and play Mozart. I mean, I read articles like that, and
I
I
do
I
too.
probably I think I did it. I'm like,
Uh-huh.
I don't know. I got really hugely pregnant, so I don't think they even made headphones that were like quite big enough. But you're trying to play that classical music as soon as they're born and their brain, and you're doing all these different things, and it's this hustle. And kids are struggling, families are struggling. That's what the statistics are saying. And we see it. We don't even really need the statistics, but we see it that anxiety and suicide and depression and all of these things that were not so common in generations past are skyrocketing. Like, I mean, people say we're like on a mental health epidemic, pandemic, I don't know what the word is, whatever, that this is really an issue. And so the message of the book is that if we can live a full life today, if we can show up for today in a way that honors our own personhood and the personhood of our kids and their whole self, if we can show up in a way that does that, and that includes like what you're talking about, it includes less, really. Like, this is a message of hope that you can do less but gain more.
Mhm.
You're pulling back and you're leaving some white space in your life, and it feels uncomfortable because everyone else is filling it to the gills, and they have this and that and this and that, and maybe your kid doesn't speak Spanish yet, or your kid doesn't speak French, and this kid, I mean, our son, we're in this stage. Our son, he's got these friends and friends through church, and we homeschool, but they don't. And he's got these good friends, and they're in calculus, and my son is not in calculus. It's We've chosen to invest our time in different ways, and so there's a fear there, right? Like, oh wait, but should we be in calculus, or is it really important that we have a balance here? And when we live that full life today, the subtitle is How a Return to Play Brightens Our Today and Prepares Kids for an Uncertain Future. That when we have those elements woven into our life, when kids are allowed to play freely inside or out, that this is really what is setting them up for a rapidly changing world. And as our kids enter into the adult years, they say that they're going to have 4 careers within the first decade of life. That's the average. That's the average, Colleen. So that means some kids are going to have more, right? Some kids might have 8 careers in the first decade of life, whereas before, people had one career. They graduated at 22, they worked till they were 52, their skill set didn't have to change. There wasn't much demanded of them in terms of flex. And now our kids have all these different jobs. So that's so many different colleagues. Think about all the different type of people that you're going to have to learn to work with if your jobs are changing every 18 months to 2 years. And so it's really, like I said, this is a message of hope. That's what the book is, that we can pull back a little bit. We can really enjoy it. We can enjoy it because everyone says it flies by. And I remember thinking I wasn't going to survive 6 weeks. That was actually really,
Right.
I had a conversation with a girlfriend when we had gone home from the hospital, and I had one friend named Samantha who had a couple older kids, and I just was so underwater. And I remember I was in the bathtub, and I called her, I think I had the phone sitting on the outside of the tub
Uh-huh.
or whatever, and I called and she was like, "Honey," she's like, "it's gonna get better by the time he's 6 weeks." And I was like, "Well, I'm not gonna be alive by then, so I don't know. This isn't working." And so it seems like this looming thing, but then I also know that every single person I have ever met in my entire life, there bar none, says it flies by. And so it's the truth. Like that someday you're going to be in that spot where you're like, "Whoa, they're already 5, they're already
Right.
7, they're 9, they're halfway to adulthood." And they don't have baby teeth anymore. I'm out of those stages, and you want to look back and have really taken advantage of it. You only get one. You get one. You get one childhood with your kids. They get one childhood. I think that we have, well, there's a really good book by Madeline Levine where she says we have doubled down out of fear. We have doubled down on the old ways. So the standardized testing, the push, push, push with all of the academics, because we're kind of scared and there's a lot of uncertainty. I mean, who knew that we would be doing podcasts? I mean, these things like
Right.
literally didn't exist in
Mhm.
decades past. So we're preparing kids for jobs that do not exist. We
Mhm.
don't even know what they are. Well, how do you do that? Not by
Right.
stuffing their head full of information that they can find on the internet. It's by learning to be flexible and to come up with something out of nothing. That's what kids do outside. Like when they go play with a group of friends and there is nothing but natural materials, they're coming up with the whole thing out of nothing and they're compromising about it. And so this, I think, is the key for today and for tomorrow. So that's a book that's coming out.
I'm so excited for it. I can't wait to read it. This is Yeah, it speaks to so many different things that we talk about here on this podcast and I talk about in person with parents. Just that idea that you just brought up, that we're preparing kids for jobs that don't exist. And I use that exact example. I mean, I have a master's degree in education too, and that I never, the podcasts weren't a thing. And I've, I'm the opposite of you. In the linguistics and the writing and math, like
Mhm.
I farmed that out in my homeschool. But, but this didn't exist. This wasn't a thing. And I'm actually really
Mhm.
grateful that I'm doing something that I wasn't prepared for, because it's given me a more
Mhm.
open mind when dealing with my children. And you talk about
Yeah.
those different kind of careers and pulling from different things. And my oldest, I have graduated one. He's going to be 21 soon, and he is a
Mhm.
freelancer. He is actually leaving tomorrow. Today's Wednesday as we're recording this. He's leaving tomorrow morning at 4 o'clock for a 6 o'clock flight to go on a 2.5 week video shoot that he's under embargo for. So he can't talk about what the client is and who it is. And it's really exciting. It's stuff that didn't
Wow.
exist when we were
Yeah.
young. And even when he was, there's nothing I could have done to prepare him
Right.
for the job he's doing, except give him time to explore videography, photography, editing. And the reason he's leaving tomorrow instead of today is because his other job is teaching
Mhm.
teens at a film school he used to take classes at locally when he was a teen.
Wow.
He's teaching a special effects class on how to edit lightsaber effects into the kids' work. Like, again, these are
Wow.
things that he prepared himself for. I didn't prepare him by exploring, by playing, by looking up YouTube videos of how to do stuff, by
Yeah.
playing with software and
Yes.
exploring and shooting videos with his brother and sisters in the backyard to try editing
Yeah.
skills out. So we need to be open-minded. We need to keep that in mind, that there are no checks that we need to check off,
Mhm.
because the goal ultimately, right, is to teach our kids that they can learn anything by exploring and
Mhm.
trusting themselves. And that's
Yeah.
the key skill we want them to learn. We want them to know that
Yeah.
they are who they are meant to be, and they can find out
Mhm.
the answers to anything through this exploration and play. And like you said, being outside just sets them up for all of these things.
Mhm. And I think that approaching it from that perspective, because this is scary. And we
Mhm.
have to say, it is scary to say, there's nothing I can do to really set them up for whatever it is that they're meant to do, except give them time. You are, control is a lot more. certain. It feels more certain. It's not, but it feels more certain, right? Like it feels like, okay, if I just check all these boxes, if we do the first grade curriculum and we finish the whole box, and then we do the second grade, like I am doing my job. It feels good. But that was a really huge thing that you said. There's nothing I could have done except give him time. This is an example of how kids are biologically designed to self-educate. And I think that if you're listening and your kids are young, I think that the way that it's meant to be is that it's meant to be that little by little, we're moving away from each other. That's how it's meant to be. And little by little, you're learning to trust. So as they're learning to trust themselves, as they toddle up onto the log and they fall off, but it's really close to the ground and they get a little scrape or whatever. I mean, I think that childhood is supposed to be filled with a lot of scrapes and bumps and things like that. That as so then we're learning to trust them as they're learning to trust themselves, and it's this gradual process so that when they're 14 and they're climbing the tree, you're not having a heart attack because you have had 14 years of seeing them firsthand learn themselves, learn how their bodies work and what they can and can't do, so that when they become those teens, because I feel it, I feel that angst. Like our oldest is in 10th grade, and so I'm thinking we're on the end here. We're in the last lap. So I'm like, well, have I done, you start to think like, well, should we have read this book and should we have done that? And what if? And I do have 15 years of experience of knowing that he has self-educated. He is biologically designed to do that. And so then you start to see the path unfolds like with your oldest, that things come as they come and they figure it out. And if your kids are young, this is a benefit of giving them open space because you start to learn how valuable it is too.
That's perfect. Okay, if you could say one last thing to listeners about that, about any of this as they are walking away from this podcast thinking, okay, I'm going to get outside, I'm going to trust my kids, what would that piece of advice be?
Okay, my piece of advice, because a lot of these are homeschool families, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Homeschool
so here's my
families,
advice.
a lot of neurodivergent kids too, those ones that are quirky
Okay,
and outside the box. So
yes, yes. Okay, so my advice is to rest, don't quit. That's my biggest piece of advice because this is the life that you want. You want this life of being together, of having the time. It's going to go by quickly and you're going to look back, and I don't wish I would have could do it over for the sake of change. Like you kind of would want to do it over for the sake of just fun, like doing it over again. This was great. And so there is a lot of time to rest. And so I think sometimes we have these days, and I mean, literally just, I'm not kidding. Colleen, I told my husband last night, I was like, today I thought maybe we should enroll our kids in school. Yesterday. Oh goodness. I mean, I
it's
would, and
universal. I think that's important though, Ginny. It's important for us to know that we all think that. So you're listening to me on a podcast, you're listening to Ginny's podcast and other homeschool people who are out there talking about homeschooling, and from social media and from podcasts look like they have it all together, but there are a lot of days I'm like, I don't know that I could keep doing this. We have backgrounds in education and have homeschooled our kids. Ginny for 15 years, me for 17. This is my 17th
yeah.
year, not counting like babyhood.
I know.
And
I always count babyhood. I count
I
it. I count
like,
it from like the
well,
time
I
they're
feel like I
born.
can't because Trevor went to school and we pulled him out in the middle of first grade. So I feel like I have to be honest
Yeah.
about that and say, okay, it's only
Yeah.
my 17th year, but we've
Yeah.
been doing this all
Mhm.
along. And I knew in my gut that he wasn't going to thrive, but that's a whole nother story. But we still think that. There are days I think
Mhm.
like, oh my gosh, what is my youngest going to do when his brother and sister are gone too? Or his two sisters are
Yeah.
gone too? Because they're so tight. And I'm like, I don't know that we're going to be able to do
Yeah.
this. And maybe I need to prep him to go to school. I don't. You do the next thing. And like Ginny said, you rest. It's okay.
Yeah, I think that's the whole thing is that if you're in a spot and it might be today, it might be like at this exact moment that you're listening. I mean, for me it was yesterday where I had really large feelings of not being adequate enough, of not being able. We've got 5 kids, and so they're in 2nd grade to 10th grade. This is pretty intense. And we're pretty chill with the schoolwork, but we're doing some stuff, but to juggle, well, you're talking about neurodivergent, you're talking about if you're talking about juggling more than one child, but even if it's just one child, then you're dealing with the social skills. I mean, you're having to be the one that carries the weight of that, like making sure that they're out seeing other people. I mean, that's actually a big weight to carry. So the social piece of it, I think, is one of the hardest because you have to have the relationships in order for your kids to have the relationships. But my point is if you're in a spot where you're up against a wall and you're just feeling low and overwhelmed, that would be what I would say is rest and don't quit. I love John Taylor Gatto's books, and he's got several of them, but in one of them, probably in several of them, he talks about how it's well researched that it only takes 100 hours to get kids to a point to where they're functionally literate. And that's at the right age and stage, right? So it's 100 hours of investment so that they can read, write, and do math well enough so that they can learn anything they want to learn, which is what you're talking about, Colleen, like being a lifelong learner, 100 hours. So I just, sometimes I fall back on that. I'm like, okay, over the course of kindergarten to 12th grade, can I find 100 hours per kid to invest? But the point is, not that, and people do
Right.
not like that. They're like, what are you going to leave them at a second grade level? But it's not that.
Right. No.
It's not that. It's just that you're giving them the opportunity to fly, and it really doesn't take as much time as we think that it does. And so I fall back on that a lot. So rest, don't quit.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Ginny, for being here today and for sharing so much wisdom with our audience. We will link to your books, your site, everything in the show notes for this episode. So if you're listening, you can check that out at raisinglifelonglearners.com/podcast. Share this episode. If you've got friends who are feeling like what Ginny was discussing, or the inadequacy, or like they just can't do it and they just need to know there's one thing, do one thing. Share this, let them know that there's hope and that they're not alone in this. There are others out there homeschooling just like they are. We'll be back next week, same time, same place, with another episode. Enjoy your kids this week. Have a great time. Adventure with them. Love on them. You're doing a great job. I'm proud of you.